Please, we can't walk anymore. Those 6 words whispered by a sunburned, barely conscious 8-year-old boy to a pack of Hell's Angels bikers changed everything that scorching Nevada afternoon. And what happened next? Nobody saw coming. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The van died without warning. One moment, it was groaning down Highway 375, like it always did, that familiar rattle in the engine Rachel had been meaning to get checked for 3 months, always meaning to never actually doing it. And the next moment, there was a sound like something tearing loose from the guts of the vehicle. A mechanical shriek that cut through the blast of hot air from the vents, and then nothing. Just the hiss of the desert and the soft, confused sounds of 6 children waking up from restless half-sleep in the back seats. Rachel Carter had both hands on the wheel when it happened. She felt the power steering go first, that sudden heavy resistance, and she guided the van to the shoulder on pure instinct, coasting the last 100 yards on momentum and prayer. When the wheels finally stopped turning, she sat there for exactly 2 seconds with her eyes closed, telling herself this was not as bad as it felt. Then she opened her eyes and looked in the rearview mirror. 6 faces stared back at her. 6 sets of eyes, some frightened, some still foggy with sleep. One pair already filling with tears, ages 5 through 14. 6 kids who had already survived more in their short lives than most adults ever would. 6 kids who were now stranded on a 2-lane highway in the Nevada desert at 11:47 in the morning, with the temperature already sitting at 113 degrees and climbing. Miss Rachel, that was Maya, 10 years old, always the first to read a room. Why did we stop? Rachel forced her voice into something steady. Just taking a little break, baby. Give me a minute. She pushed the door open and the heat hit her like a physical thing. A wall of dry, suffocating air that pressed against her face and chest and stole her first breath away. After 3 years driving this route for the state of Nevada, ferrying kids between placements and hearings and supervised visits, she knew desert heat. She respected it. But this was different. This was the kind of heat that had a personality, the kind that made you understand on a cellular level that the earth was not always a friendly place for human beings. She popped the hood. She stared at the engine for a long moment. She knew exactly as much about engines as she knew about nuclear physics, which was approximately nothing, but she stared at it anyway because it gave her something to do while her brain caught up with the situation. The serpentine belt was gone, not broken gone, like it had simply decided it was done and removed itself from the equation entirely. Rachel had enough mechanical knowledge to recognize that this was not a roadside fix. This was a tow truck. This was a garage. This was hours minimum, and that was if someone came. She reached for her phone. No signal. She walked 10 feet in one direction. No signal. 20 feet the other way. No signal. She held the phone above her head like she was trying to offer it to the sky. Nothing, not one bar, not even the ghost of a bar. Okay, she said out loud to no one, to herself, to the empty highway, stretching out in both directions like a gray ribbon melting at the edges. Okay, think. She got back in the van because the van was still slightly cooler than outside, and she needed to talk to the kids before the panic in her chest became visible on her face. All right, guys, listen up. She turned in her seat and looked at them, really looked at them. Maya with her watchful eyes. Ethan, 8 years old, the smallest of the group, already sweating through his t-shirt, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Destiny, 14, who had the particular exhausted wariness of a kid who had been let down too many times and was waiting for the next time to arrive. Marcus, 11, holding his little sister Lily's hand, Lily, who was only 5 and didn't fully understand what was happening, but understood enough to be scared. And then Devin, 13, sitting in the back row with his arms crossed and his jaw set, performing the kind of toughness that boys his age wore like armor over the places they were most afraid. The van broke down, Rachel said. No point dressing it up. These were kids who could smell a sugar-coated truth from a mile away. My phone doesn't have signal out here, so I can't call for help right now. But people drive this highway and someone is going to come by, and when they do, we are going to flag them down and get some help. Okay, this is manageable. We've got this. How much water do we have? Devin asked. Not scared, practical. She appreciated that. Rachel reached under her seat and pulled out the small cooler she always kept back there. She already knew what was in it before she looked: 2 bottles of water, one juice box, and the melting remains of an ice pack she'd used 3 days ago and forgotten to replace. She counted heads: 6 kids, 2 bottles of water, a juice box. The ice was water now, technically, but warm and sitting in a plastic bag. We have enough, she said, because what else was she going to say? That doesn't look like enough, Maya said quietly. We're going to be smart about it. Small sips, and we're going to stay in the van where it's shadier, and we're not going to move around more than we have to, and we're going to wait for someone to stop. Vehicles come through here. This is a public road. Ethan raised his hand. He always raised his hand, even outside of school. It broke her heart every time. Miss Rachel, are we going to be okay? She looked at that little face, 8 years old, sunburn, already pinking at the tips of his ears, complete and total trust in his eyes, despite every reason he had ever been given not to trust adults, and something in her chest clenched like a fist. Yes, she said, we are absolutely going to be okay. She almost believed it. The first car came 40 minutes later. Rachel heard it before she saw it, the distant engine sound cutting through the desert stillness, and she was out of the van and in the road before her conscious mind had finished processing the sound. She stood in the center of the lane with both arms raised above her head, waving her whole body, one enormous signal for help. The car, silver sedan, slowed as it approached. She could see the driver through the windshield, a man in sunglasses, maybe 40. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was waving with everything she had, arms and face and body, every cell of her, screaming, stop, stop, please, stop. He sped up and drove around her. She stood there in the road for a moment, after he passed, her arms still half raised, watching his taillights disappear. Behind her, she heard Devin say very quietly, wow. She didn't turn around. She didn't want them to see her face. She needed 60 seconds to put herself back together before she could walk back to that van and be the person those kids needed her to be. She took 60 seconds. She rebuilt herself from the inside out. She turned around. Someone else will come, she said. Someone else came 25 minutes after that. A pickup truck this time. Rachel was standing at the side of the road rather than in the middle of it, not wanting to seem aggressive, lifting both hands in a clear plea for help as the truck slowed. She could see a woman driving. A woman. She felt a surge of hope so sharp it was almost painful. The woman slowed to maybe 15 miles an hour. She craned her neck to look at the van, at Rachel, at the children visible through the windows. Then she accelerated and drove on. Rachel watched her go. She heard Lily start to cry inside the van, not a scared cry, just a hot, tired, uncomfortable cry. The kind of crying that had no specific target, but filled the air anyway. She heard Maya's low voice trying to soothe her. She heard Devin say something sharp and frustrated, and Marcus telling him to shut up and Devin telling Marcus to make him. She turned back to the highway and looked in both directions. Nothing, just the road and the heat shimmering off the asphalt in visible waves, and the billboard 40 yards away. Faded ad for a casino that had probably been closed for a decade, casting the only shade for as far as she could see. She had $12 in her wallet. She had half a granola bar in her purse. She had no water left in the cooler because she'd given the last of it to Lily 20 minutes ago. She went back to the van. Okay, she said, and she could hear the difference in her own voice now, the way the steadiness was costing her something. New plan. We move over to that billboard. It's shade, real shade. We stay there and we keep flagging down cars. Getting 6 kids from the van to the billboard took 11 minutes and more energy than they had. Lily had to be carried. Ethan was wobbling on his feet in a way that frightened Rachel deeply. Even Devin, who was the oldest and toughest and most determined to show none of what he felt, was moving slowly. His head down, not arguing, which was somehow worse than if he had been arguing. They settled in the strip of shadow under the billboard. It wasn't much, the sun was high and the shadow was narrow, but it was something. Rachel sat with her back against the base of the structure and counted heads for the 100th time and tried to think. The map in the van's glove compartment, a paper map, actual paper, the kind nobody used anymore, showed a gas station approximately 4 miles west. She'd noticed it earlier, not because she expected to need it, but because she always tracked landmarks when she drove unfamiliar routes. 4 miles. In flat terrain under normal conditions, an easy walk, nothing. But these were not normal conditions. The asphalt was radiating heat she could feel through the soles of her shoes. One of the children was 5 years old. One of them could barely stand up. She sat with the map in her lap and did the math in her head, not the hopeful math, the real math, and the numbers kept coming out wrong. What are we going to do? Maya sat down beside her. Not asking in a panicked way, asking like a partner, asking a partner. Like the 10-year-old she was trying very hard not to be. Rachel looked at her. She thought about all the training she'd done: crisis intervention, child psychology, trauma-informed care, de-escalation techniques. 4 years of college and 3 years of field experience, and not one single module on what to do when you were sitting in the Nevada desert with 6 kids, no water, no phone signal, and a son that was trying to kill you. We're going to be creative, Rachel said. Miss Rachel, Maya's voice dropped to almost nothing. Ethan looks really bad. Rachel looked across the strip of shadow to where Ethan was sitting with his knees pulled up to his chest. His eyes were open, but they had a quality to them that scared her, a flatness, a distance. His breathing was visible from where she sat, his small chest rising and falling too fast. She moved to him immediately. She put her hand on his forehead and felt the heat radiating off his skin like a second sun. Ethan, hey, look at me. He looked at her, slow, like his eyes were working harder than they should have to. I'm hot, he said. His voice was thin and small and wrong. I know, baby, I know. She looked around at the others. Lily was lying with her head in Marcus's lap, eyes closed, too quiet. Destiny had her knees pulled up and her head down, conserving everything, which was smart. Destiny was always smart in practical ways, but her skin was flushed in a way that worried Rachel. Devin was still sitting with his arms crossed, but there was a tremor in his jaw he was trying to hide. She made a decision. It was the wrong one, she would know that later. But in the moment, with the heat pressing down and the highway empty and 2 kids already showing signs, she couldn't ignore it. Felt like the only choice she had left. We're walking to the gas station, she said. Devin's head came up. 4 miles. It's our best option. It's 4 miles in 115 degrees with a 5-year-old. Devin, I'm just saying what it is, he said. Not defiant, not this time, scared and trying to make sure the facts were on the table because no one else was going to put them there. I know what it is. She stood. And I know that sitting here and waiting for cars that don't stop is also a choice. And I've weighed them both, and right now I think moving is better than waiting. Okay, so I need everyone on their feet. She helped Ethan stand. He leaned into her side and she held him there, her arm around his shoulders, and she thought, I have to get this child somewhere safe. That is the only thing that matters. Everything else is details. They started walking. So they made it exactly 1.25 miles. Rachel knew the distance because she'd been counting her steps, one of the techniques she'd used on long-distance runs back in her 20s before foster care had eaten her free time alive. And when they stopped, when it became undeniably clear that they had to stop, she did the arithmetic and got 1.24 miles. Ethan had gone down first. Not dramatically, not a collapse so much as a slow folding his knees, giving his body just quietly refusing to continue. Rachel caught him before he hit the ground and carried him for a while, maybe 300 yards. But she was also not okay. Her head was pounding with a specific grinding pain that she recognized as dehydration, and her vision had started to do something at the edges that she didn't examine too closely because there was no time to be incapacitated. Then Lily sat down in the road and said very calmly, I can't. And Marcus sat down beside her because he wouldn't leave her. And once 2 of them were sitting, the group cohesion simply dissolved the way it always does. When exhaustion hits a critical mass and the social pressure to keep going stops being stronger than the physical pressure to stop. They were back at this road's edge. The gas station was 2.76 miles away. Behind them, the van was 1.24 miles away, which might as well have been 100. Devin had both hands on his knees, bent over, breathing. He straightened up and looked at Rachel. What now? He wasn't being hostile. He genuinely wanted to know. For the first time since she'd met him, all the armor was down, and underneath it was just a 13-year-old boy who was frightened and looking to an adult for an answer. Rachel opened her mouth. She closed it. She had nothing. She had no plan. She had 6 children in serious distress in a highway shoulder in the Nevada desert, and she had nothing. And then from somewhere to the east, from back the way they'd come, she heard it. At first, she thought it was thunder. Her heat-addled brain genuinely suggested thunder as a possibility, which told her something about the state she was in. But the sound didn't roll and fade the way thunder did. It built, it grew, it multiplied. It became not one sound, but 20 sounds layered together into a single tremendous vibration that she felt in her sternum before she could fully process it with her ears. Motorcycles, a lot of them. Devon straightened up and turned toward the sound. Maya moved closer to Rachel's side without saying a word. Ethan, lying on the ground with his eyes half closed, turned his head toward the approaching roar. Rachel stood up. She put herself between the sound and the children the way she always did when something unknown was approaching. Pure instinct, every molecule of her body oriented toward protection. The motorcycles came around the long curve in the highway like a dark wave, two abreast, then two more, extending back and back, the riders in black leather and denim and chrome, their bikes massive and thundering and occupying the entire road. 20 of them, at least. Rachel didn't move. She couldn't have told you if it was bravery or if her legs had simply stopped receiving signals from her brain. She stood at the edge of the road and she watched them come. The lead bike, a massive machine, ridden by a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite and road grime and hard years, slowed as it approached. The ones behind him slowed too in sequence, a disciplined ripple moving back through the formation. They came to a stop in the road in front of her engines, idling down to a low rolling growl. The man on the lead bike put down his kickstand and took off his helmet. He was big, not just tall big in a fundamental way, the kind of physical presence that made you recalibrate your sense of scale. His hair was gray at the temples. His face was a map of somewhere difficult. His eyes were pale and direct and gave nothing away. He looked at Rachel. He looked at the children behind her. He looked at the van far back down the road. "You need help," he said. His voice was flat and factual. Not unkind, not particularly warm, just a man asking a question. Rachel opened her mouth to answer some automatic, polite social reflex answer that her overtaxed brain was preparing to deliver, something like, "We're okay, thank you, someone is coming." And then Ethan behind her pushed himself up from the ground with both hands. He stood. He wobbled. He took 2 unsteady steps forward, past Rachel, past the line where she'd placed herself between him and the unknown. He looked up at the man on the motorcycle with those dark, exhausted, too old for 8 years old eyes. And he said it. Those 6 words, barely a whisper, but somehow cutting straight through the engine rumble and the desert wind and the pounding in Rachel's temples. "Please, we can't walk anymore." And then his knees gave out. The man on the lead bike was moving before Ethan hit the ground. He was off the motorcycle in a single motion, crossing the distance in 3 strides, catching the boy before he landed. He went to one knee on the hot asphalt with Ethan in his arms, and he looked up at Rachel, and she saw something move across his face that she would think about for a very long time afterward, something that cracked the stone-flat expression open for just a second before he locked it back down. "Water," he said, loud, not to her, to the men behind him. "Now, all of it." And that was the moment Rachel Carter understood that the most terrifying thing she'd seen all day was about to become the only thing standing between 6 children and a desert that had already decided it was done being patient. The man caught Ethan with both arms before the boy's knees hit the asphalt, and in that single motion, that one instinctive lunge forward from a man who looked like he'd never done anything gently in his life, everything shifted. Rachel didn't process it right away. Her brain was still running the fear protocol, still cataloging threat, still doing the math on 20 men in black leather and what that meant for 6 children in her care. But her eyes were watching something that didn't match the math. The man was on one knee on the hot road, and he was holding Ethan, the way you hold something you don't want to break, and he was looking down at the boy's face with an expression that had no business being on a face like his. "He's burning up," the man said. Not to Rachel, to himself almost, like the information landed somewhere personal. "Water." He said it again louder, and this time it cracked across the desert air like a command. "All of it, now, and somebody get a tarp up, anything, I need shade over these kids immediately." The formation behind him dissolved into motion so fast it startled her. These were not men who needed to be told twice. Bikes went to kickstands in a rolling sequence. Saddlebags came open. Someone was pulling a rolled canvas from the back of a bike, 2 rows back, and tossing it forward, hand to hand, without a word exchanged. 2 men had water bottles out before the canvas even landed. Rachel stood exactly where she was watching this happen, and she felt something dangerous occur inside her chest. a loosening, a cracking at the seams of the composure she'd been white-knuckling for the past 3 hours. She couldn't afford that yet. She pressed her fingernails into her palm and held herself together with the physical pain of it. Ma'am, one of the bikers, younger, maybe late 20s, a red beard, eyes that were surprisingly gentle, stepped in front of her with a water bottle held out in both hands. Drink something. You're going to be no good to them if you go down too. She took the bottle. She drank. The water was cold, genuinely cold, still ice-chilled from wherever it had come from, and it hit her system like a restart button. She hadn't realized how far gone she was until she felt herself coming back. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said, but not unkindly. Let's get the kids sorted first. The man who'd caught Ethan still hadn't stood up. He was talking to the boy low, calm, the way you talk to someone you're trying to keep tethered to consciousness. Hey, what's your name? Ethan's eyes opened to half-mast. Ethan. Ethan, good, I'm Wyatt. Can you feel your hands? A pause, then Ethan made a small movement with his fingers. Yeah, good. That's real good. You did the right thing coming forward like that. That was brave. Wyatt looked up at one of his men. Tommy, I need the first aid bag, the good one, not the road kit. Tommy, a barrel-chested man with a silver braid down his back, had already turned toward his bike. He came back with a bag that was not the sad collection of Band-Aids and aspirin Rachel kept in her glove compartment. This was a serious kit, the kind that suggested someone in this group had actual medical training, or at least had spent enough time in situations where medical training was necessary that they'd invested accordingly. Wyatt looked at Rachel, direct. No warmth in it, but no hostility either. Just assessment. How long have they been out here? Almost 4 hours. Something tightened in his jaw. Last water. About an hour and a half ago. I gave the last of it to the youngest one. Which one? Rachel pointed to Lily, who was sitting with her head against Marcus's shoulder, eyes closed frighteningly still. Wyatt tracked the direction of her finger and made a decision in about 2 seconds. Danny, he said, the little one. Take her temperature check. Her pupils get fluids in her slow and steady. Don't rush it or she'll be sick. You know what you're doing. Danny, a man somewhere north of 50, with forearms the size of most people's calves and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck, moved toward Lily with a steadiness that was its own kind of reassurance. Rachel found her voice. Who are you people? Wyatt finally stood up, all 6 feet and change of him. Ethan carefully handed to a man beside him, who accepted the child with a practiced ease that said this was not the first person this man had helped up from the ground. Wyatt looked at Rachel. People who stopped, he said. I can see that, I mean. She gestured at the organized chaos happening around her, the precision of it, the way these men were functioning as a unit without visible communication, each one seeming to know exactly where to go and what to do. This is, you clearly have some kind of, have you done this before? Not this exactly. He looked back at his men for a moment, and something moved across his face, not quite pride, more like recognition. Then he looked back at her. What happened to the van? She explained quickly. The belt, the map, the 2 cars that had stopped to do the math and then driven on anyway. She watched him while she talked, and she could see him doing his own calculations, running numbers she wasn't privy to. Gas station, he said when she finished. 4 miles. I know, I tried to walk there. In this heat. With these kids. I didn't have another. I'm not criticizing you. His voice was flat and even. I'm establishing the situation. 4 miles is not an option. The van is done. Nobody's coming to help. We've been on this stretch for 2 hours and you're the first people we've seen stopped. He looked at her steadily, which means the situation is what it is. Rachel felt the implication of that settle over her. She'd known it, some part of her had known it since the second car drove past without stopping, but hearing it said out loud by someone who had no reason to sugarcoat it made it land differently. So what do we do? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of a man who didn't know, the silence of a man who knew exactly what he was going to say and was deciding how to say it. My guys can get these kids to town, he said. 32 miles, 40 minutes at highway speed, and the nearest hospital is in Alamo. We can be there in under an hour. She stared at him. On motorcycles. On motorcycles. She looked behind him at the formation of men and bikes, and she tried to put that image together with the image of 6 children strapped to the backs of those machines, and the 2 pictures did not want to fit in the same frame. They're children, she said. I know what they are. The youngest one is 5. I know. He didn't look away from her. My guys will hold them. Every single one of them. We ride in a closed formation. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. Nobody is dropping a child. I will personally guarantee that with everything I have. You can't guarantee, ma'am, he said it quiet. Something in his voice changed register, less flat, more direct, more real. I understand what I'm asking you to do. I understand what it looks like from where you're standing. 20 men you don't know with a history that doesn't exactly come with a good recommendation letter asking you to put children on their bikes. I get it. I do. He paused. But I need you to look at that little boy right there and tell me that waiting for a car that's not coming is the better choice. She looked at Ethan. Danny had him sitting up now with a hand at his back and a bottle of electrolyte drink. Where had that come from? Tilted carefully to his lips. His color was still wrong. His eyes were still too slow. She looked at Lily. Danny had gotten Lily onto her feet for a moment, checking her standing balance, and Rachel didn't like the way the child's legs were cooperating. Or not cooperating. She looked at Devin, who was watching Wyatt with the specific attention of someone trying to determine whether a threat was real or performed, running the same calculus Rachel was running, but with 13 years of survival instinct behind it instead of 36. Devin met her eyes. He gave her the smallest nod she'd ever seen. It was not a nod of enthusiasm. It was a nod of someone who had accepted a reality and was communicating that acceptance to the only adult in the situation. Rachel turned back to Wyatt. If anything happens to any of them, nothing is going to happen to any of them. I need to be with them. I need to be on a bike too with at least one of the younger ones. Already figured, he said. He turned and raised his voice. Red, you're with the lady and one of the little ones. Nobody rides alone. He looked back at Rachel. Red is the one who brought you the water. He's good people. Steadiest rider I got. What about you? I'm taking the boy who fell. He said it simply, like it wasn't a choice but a fact that had already been determined. He stays with me. Rachel absorbed this. A man she'd known for 8 minutes was telling her he was personally going to carry her most vulnerable child across 32 miles of Nevada highway, and her entire nervous system was telling her 4 different things simultaneously, none of them in agreement. She heard a sound behind her. She turned. Maya was standing a few feet away listening. She'd heard all of it. Of course she had. Maya heard everything, processed everything, cataloged everything. She was looking at Wyatt with those watchful eyes, doing her own assessment with the gravity of someone twice her age. Will it be scary? Maya asked him. Directly, no preamble. Wyatt looked at her with the same directness he'd given Rachel. Probably a little. The noise is loud and it moves fast. But nobody's going to let go of you. Not for 1 second. How do you know? Because I'll kill anyone who does, he said, and then appeared to realize what had come out of his mouth, and something happened in his expression that was almost a wince. What I mean is, I know what you mean, Maya said. She studied him for another second. Okay. She turned and went back to the others with the quiet authority of a child who had appointed herself a deputy and was now returning to her post. Wyatt watched her go. Rachel watched him watch her. How old is she? He said. 10. I was quiet for a moment. She's going to be all right, that one. She's already all right, Rachel said. She's been all right despite everything. She stopped. I need to call this in. As soon as we get signal, I need to call my supervisor. I need to call the state. These kids are wards of Nevada. There are protocols. I know about protocols, he said, and there was something in the way he said it tired a little, the way someone is tired of a thing they've had to deal with for a very long time. We'll get you signal in about 4 miles. You can make every call you need to make. But right now, I need you to let us help you. She looked at him for a long moment. She was a trained professional. She was a social worker. She had a framework for assessing risk, and this situation had risk written all over it in ways that her training was frantically trying to annotate. And then she looked at Ethan and Lily and the stripe of sunburn across Destiny's cheekbones, and the way Devin's hands were shaking slightly even though his jaw was set, and she let the framework go. Tell me what to do, she said. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just turned toward his men and said, Mount up, we're moving. What happened in the next 15 minutes was something Rachel would spend a long time trying to find the right words for and never quite manage it. She would describe it eventually as a kind of organized tenderness, which was not a phrase she would have expected to attach to 20 Hells Angels on a Nevada highway, but which was the only phrase that fit. The men gathered around the children with a care that looked incongruous and felt completely real. They introduced themselves, not all of them, not formally, but the ones who were going to carry a child made a point of crouching down to eye level and saying their name and asking the child's name back and waiting for the answer with a patience that said they understood this mattered. Big road-worn men with calloused hands going careful and deliberate with small frightened people. Red sat on the hot asphalt in front of Lily and held out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Red. Oh, that's kind of a weird name. You want to hear how I got it?" And Lily, who had been too exhausted to cry, looked at his hair and said, "Is it because of your hair?" And Red said, "Man, I was hoping to tell the story, but yeah, basically." And Lily made a sound that was almost a laugh, and Rachel felt something crack open in her chest that she absolutely could not afford right now and had to manually push back down. Marcus refused initially to let anyone separate him from Lily. He stood between her and the biker assigned to her with his 11-year-old chest puffed out and his chin up and said, "She goes with me, or she doesn't go." The biker, a quiet man named Cole, looked at him and said, "You're right. She should have someone she knows. How about this? You ride with Red. She rides with Red, you put your arms around her from behind, and neither one of you goes anywhere." Marcus thought about this with tremendous seriousness and said, "You promise Red won't drop us?" Cole said, "Red hasn't dropped anything in 15 years. Marcus said, "What did he drop 15 years ago?" Cole said, "That's a long story." Marcus considered this. "Okay," he said. Destiny was the one who surprised Rachel. She'd expected Destiny 14 mistrustful armored to be the hardest. But Destiny walked up to the biker she'd been paired with, a quiet man named Sergeant, who was maybe 40, with a scar along his jaw, and the eyes of someone who'd seen a lot and decided to keep going anyway. And she looked at him and said, "I've ridden a motorcycle before." Sergeant raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, my uncle had one. I was 7. She paused. "I remember it was loud." "It's loud," he agreed. "Okay." She climbed on behind him with a dignity that made Rachel's throat tighten. Devin was last. He stood looking at the bike he'd been directed to, looking at the rider. A man about 30 with a quiet demeanor and the word prospect in smaller letters below his patch, meaning something in the hierarchy of this group that Rachel didn't know enough to decode. And Devin said, "I'm not scared." The rider said, "Okay. I just want you to know that. I heard you." Devin got on the bike. He put his hands on the rider's sides, not gripping, just resting, preserving the fiction of not needing to hold on. The rider reached back and took Devin's hands and moved them to his own torso firmly, without comment, and Devin led him. Wyatt had Ethan last. The boy was standing on his own feet now, marginally held there mostly by Tommy's hand at his shoulder. Wyatt came and crouched in front of him at eye level, this massive man folding himself down to the level of an 8-year-old, and he said, "You remember what I told you about being brave?" Ethan nodded. His eyes were clearer than they'd been an hour ago. The water and the electrolytes in the shade had pulled him back from wherever he'd been drifting toward. "You're going to ride up front with me," Wyatt said. "Right in front where I can keep my arms around you the whole way. You won't be able to fall because I won't let you. You understand? What if you need your hands for the bike? I've been riding for 30 years. These bikes could practically drive themselves." He paused. "Almost." Ethan looked at the motorcycle. He looked at Wyatt. He said, "Are you actually a Hell's Angel?" Wyatt said, "I am." Ethan processed this. "My teacher said Hell's Angels are dangerous." A silence stretched out for a beat. "Your teacher's not entirely wrong," Wyatt said carefully. "We can be." He held the boy's gaze. "But right now I'm just a guy who stopped." "Okay." Ethan looked at him for a long time with those exhausted, too-knowing eyes. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. Wyatt lifted him onto the bike like he weighed nothing and settled himself in behind him, his arms coming around the boy on both sides, and Ethan reached up and put both hands on Wyatt's forearm, not scared, just anchoring, just holding on, and the image of it, this small boy held inside the arms of this enormous man who the world had decided was something to be feared, hit Rachel somewhere she hadn't expected to be hit. She got on behind Red with one arm holding the saddlebag and the other around nobody, because Lily and Marcus were between them. The children pressed together in the middle with Red in front and Rachel at the back, and the whole improbable arrangement somehow holding. Wyatt looked back across the formation. Every man was mounted. Every child was secured. He looked at Rachel. She gave him a single nod. He faced forward. He kicked the engine to life. And then 20 engines caught together in a sound that rolled across the desert like thunder. Finding its voice, and the convoy began to move slowly at first, forming its shape around the most precious cargo any of them had ever carried. And Rachel felt the wind begin, and pressed her face against the back of Red's jacket, and allowed herself just for a moment, just one moment, to stop holding everything up by herself. 32 miles ahead, a town was waiting. Rachel didn't know yet what she would find there, or what questions she would have to answer, or what the state of Nevada would make of the decisions she'd made in the past 4 hours. She didn't know what would be said about her judgment or her choices or the particular brand of desperation that had led her to say yes to 20 Hells Angels on a highway in the middle of nowhere. She knew only this: 6 children were alive and moving, and no longer burning in the sun, held in the arms of men the world had told them to fear, and the desert was falling away behind them at 70 miles an hour. And somewhere ahead there was signal and water and a phone call she needed to make, and she would handle all of that. But right now the wind was in her face, and Ethan was still alive, and the convoy was moving, and that was enough. That was everything. The first bar of signal hit Rachel's phone at mile marker 22, and she felt it vibrate in her pocket like a small detonation. Red felt her shift behind him and turned his head just enough to be heard over the wind. "You got something, 1 bar," she said. "Maybe. Hold tight. 2 more miles and you'll have 4. She held tight. She counted the miles in her heartbeat. At mile 24, her phone vibrated 3 times in rapid succession, texts coming through, delayed, stacking up, like they'd been queued behind a bomb. And at mile 25, she had enough signal to make a call, and she pressed her supervisor's number with a thumb that was not entirely steady. It rang twice. Then Sandra Ochoa's voice came through, and Rachel had worked for Sandra for 3 years and knew her as a woman who did not rattle easily. But what Rachel heard in those first 2 seconds was the specific sound of someone who had already been rattled and was working very hard to sound like they hadn't been. "Rachel, oh, thank God, where are you? We've been trying to reach you for 3 hours. I had 2 patrol units on Highway 375 looking for the van." "The van is still on 375, Rachel said. "We're not with it." A pause. "What do you mean you're not with it?" "I mean we're on motorcycles." Another pause longer. "I'm going to need you to say that again." "We're on motorcycles, Sandra. 20 of them. We'll be in Alamo in about 15 minutes. I need you to have someone meet us at the emergency entrance of the nearest medical facility, because at least 2 of the children need to be evaluated, and possibly 3, and I need you to not ask me any questions right now that I don't have answers to." The silence on Sandra's end was the silence of a woman running 17 mental calculations simultaneously, while also trying to decide how to feel about all of them. "Motorcycles," she said again, like the word was a foreign object she was turning over in her hands. "Hell's Angels specifically," Rachel said, because she might as well get it all out at once. "They stopped for us on her highway. They have first aid equipment, and one of them clearly has medical training, and they've been, Sandra, they've been incredible. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But I need you to trust me right now. Okay, I need you to have medical on standby, and I need you to coordinate with local law enforcement, because these men are going to need—" She stopped herself, because she realized she didn't actually know what these men were going to need legally, politically, officially, when they pulled into a Nevada town with 6 foster children on their bikes. She hadn't thought that far ahead. "Just be there," she said. "Please." "I'll be there," Sandra said. "Rachel, the kids, they're alive," Rachel said. "All 6, they're alive." She heard Sandra exhale a long, shaking breath that said more than any words would have. 15 minutes, Sandra said. "I'll have everyone there." Rachel hung up. She pressed the phone against her chest for a moment and stared at the road ahead. She could see Wyatt's bike at the point of the formation that brought back those steady hands, and in front of him, the small shape of Ethan held inside the frame of the man's arms, sitting straight now. Not slumped anymore, actually sitting up and watching the road come at them with something that looked almost like attention, almost like wonder. Something about that image gutted her completely, and she turned her face to the side so Red wouldn't see. What she didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that the 15 minutes between that phone call and the town of Alamo would carry inside them a moment that would rewrite everything Rachel thought she understood about the man who'd caught Ethan in the road. She was about to find out. It happened at mile 28. 4 miles outside of town, the convoy was running smooth, tight formation, steady pace. The kind of disciplined riding that spoke to years of muscle memory. When the radio clipped to Tommy's jacket crackled, and Tommy said something Rachel couldn't hear over the wind, and she saw him lean toward Wyatt's bike and say something directly into Wyatt's ear. Wyatt's posture changed. Barely, almost nothing, but Rachel had been watching that back for 25 miles and she caught it. A tightening, a decision happening in real time. He pulled the convoy to the shoulder, all 20 bikes smooth and simultaneous, like a single organism responding to a nerve impulse. Rachel felt the fear come back. "What's happening?" she said to Red. Red was already off the bike, handing Lily carefully to the man beside him, moving toward the front. His face was professional, contained. "Stay here," he said. She didn't stay there. She got off the bike and she followed him to the front because if something was wrong with Ethan, she was not going to be 3 bikes back when it happened. Wyatt already had Ethan off the bike. He was standing with the boy in front of him, both hands on the child's shoulders, looking at his face with an intensity that Rachel recognized as the particular focus of someone trying not to show how alarmed they are. Ethan was conscious. He was standing. But his skin was the wrong color, not flushed anymore, the other direction, pale in a way that showed through his sunburn, and his eyes had that flatness again, that distance, and his breathing was wrong. Too fast, too shallow. What happened? Rachel was at Wyatt's side before she'd made a conscious decision to be there. "He said his chest hurt," Wyatt said. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. "Said it started about 5 minutes ago." Rachel knelt in front of Ethan. "Ethan, hey, look at me." She put her hand on his face. He was cool, which was not right, which was the opposite of what he should be given, that they were still in 90+ degree air. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" I put one small hand on the center of his chest. "Here, and I feel dizzy, and my stomach feels bad." Rachel looked up at Wyatt. He was already looking at Danny, who had moved in from the right and was crouched beside Ethan with 2 fingers on the boy's wrist and his eyes on his watch. "Pulse is rapid," Danny said. "Weak." He looked at Wyatt. "He needs IV fluids, and he needs them now. This is past what we can do on the side of the road." Rachel's phone was in her hand before Danny finished the sentence. She was dialing 911 before she had a conscious plan. 911, what is your emergency?" "I need an ambulance on Highway 375. We're at mile marker." She looked up. Some called out 28. "Mile marker 28 heading westbound. I have an 8-year-old male, possible heat stroke, progressing to heat exhaustion with cardiac involvement, rapid weak pulse, chest pain, loss of color. He needs immediate transport." "Ma'am, I'm dispatching now. Can you keep him conscious and—" "Yes, please hurry." She hung up. She looked at Wyatt. 8 minutes minimum, maybe more." He nodded once. He looked at Danny. "What do we do in 8 minutes?" Danny was already in the first aid bag. "We keep him cool, we keep him awake, we keep him still." He pulled out what looked like a chemical cold pack, the kind you crack and shake, and cracked it without hesitation and pressed it against the back of Ethan's neck. "Talk to him. Keep his brain engaged." Wyatt sat down on the road, right down on the asphalt in the middle of the highway's shoulder, in his leather and his patches and his 30 years of road miles, and he sat cross-legged in front of Ethan so their eyes were level. "Hey," he said, "you still with me?" Ethan's eyes came back to him. "Yeah." "Good, let's talk. You mentioned your teacher earlier. What's your teacher's name?" "Mr. Patel." "What subject?" "3rd grade, everything." "Favorite thing about 3rd grade?" Ethan thought about this with visible effort. "Math." Something moved across Wyatt's face. Surprise, maybe. "Math, really? I'm good at it." "What's 8 times 7? A pause. "Then 56. "Yeah," Wyatt said it quietly. "Yeah, that's right." Rachel watched this and felt the thing in her chest crack open again, and this time she couldn't push it back down. She pressed her hand to her mouth and turned away for a moment, just a moment, and Devin was right behind her. He'd come up without her noticing, moving through the stopped convoy, and he was standing there looking at Ethan with an expression he'd stopped trying to hide. "Is he going to be okay?" Devin asked. His voice was stripped of everything except the question. "Yes," Rachel said, and this time she meant it differently than she'd meant it 3 hours ago. This time the word had Wyatt in it, and Danny, and a cracked chemical cold pack on the back of a small boy's neck, in 8 minutes until an ambulance that was actually coming. You don't know that, Devon said. No, she admitted, but I believe it. Devon was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He walked forward past her, past the bikes, and he sat down next to Wyatt on the road beside Ethan. He didn't say anything. He just sat down next to the boy close enough for their shoulders to almost touch, and he looked at Etat and said, 56 is right. I was going to say 54, but I was wrong. Ethan looked at him. You were testing me. Maybe. I knew it was 56. I know you did. Devon said it in a tone Rachel had never heard from him before. The tone of someone who was allowing himself to care about something out loud. You're annoying smart. Ethan made a sound that was the ghost of a laugh. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Rachel knew because she counted every one of them standing at the side of the road with her arms wrapped around her own chest, watching Danny manage Ethan's breathing and Wyatt keep up a steady stream of conversation about math and Mr. Patel and whether 56 was actually right or whether there might be a trick, and Devon sitting shoulder almost to shoulder with Ethan, like he was physically holding the younger boy in this world through proximity alone. When the paramedics came out of the ambulance and took in the scene, 6 children, 20 bikers, a social worker who looked like she'd been through something, a massive man in a Hell's Angels cut, sitting cross-legged on the highway asphalt, talking multiplication tables to an 8-year-old. The lead paramedic stopped for exactly 1 second and did a very visible recalibration of everything he thought he was walking into. Then he moved to Ethan and got to work, and Rachel stepped back and let him. Wyatt stood, moved out of the paramedic's way without being asked. Without comment, stepped back and folded himself back into the group of his men who had gathered in a loose perimeter at a respectful distance. Not hovering, just present. Rachel watched him go. She watched him rejoin his men, watched the way they moved slightly apart to let him in. Watched the way nobody said anything to him, but the group shifted and settled around him in a way that said things without words. One of the paramedics came to Rachel. Young man, maybe 25, efficient and focused. We're transporting the boy. You said there were others who needed evaluation. The 5-year-old, Rachel said, and I want the others checked. All of them. We can take 2 in the ambulance. Is there more transportation coming? My supervisor is meeting us in Alamo with vehicles. If you can take the youngest 2, and I follow with the convoy. The paramedic nodded. He was already moving. Rachel turned to find Wyatt at her shoulder. She hadn't heard him come back. We'll follow the ambulance in, he said. Keep the formation around the kids that are staying with the convoy. You ride with the little ones if you need to. I need to stay with all of them, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then you stay with the convoy. We'll get you all there. She looked at him, really looked at him the way she hadn't fully allowed herself to do in the chaos, in the fear, in the logistics of the past hour. Up close in something other than the emergency of the first meeting, she could see things she'd missed. The gray in his hair was more than at the temples, it ran through the whole of it earned. The lines in his face were not just hardness. Some of them were grief or something in the neighborhood of grief, the kind that took years to carve. He wore his cut the way some men wear a military uniform, with the weight of what it represented fully acknowledged. How did you know what to do? She asked. With the kids, with Ethan, the cold pack, the fluids, the way Danny went straight to the pulse. That wasn't random. He was quiet for a beat. We do a lot of runs, he said. Charity runs. Some toy runs for kids at Christmas. Hospital visits. He paused. We did 3 summers working with search and rescue in this county. Found 14 people in the desert in 4 years. 2 kids. She stared at him. You're a search and rescue volunteer. He held her gaze. We are a lot of things, he said. The world usually only sees one of them. Before Rachel could respond to that, before she could find the words for what that sentence did to everything, she'd assumed a voice came from behind them. Small, familiar. Maya. Mr. Wyatt, he turned. Maya was standing with her arms crossed in that watchful way of hers. Her eyes moving between Rachel and Wyatt with the focus of a child who has learned that the conversations adults have when they think kids aren't listening are the only ones that matter. Is Ethan going to the hospital? She asked. He is, Wyatt said, by himself. The paramedics will be with him. That's not the same as someone he knows. She said it without accusation. Just fact, the kind of fact that lands harder than accusations do because there's no defense against it. Wyatt looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the ambulance. She looked at the convoy. She did the math in her head. 5 remaining kids, 20 bikers, 15 miles to Alamo. Sandra meeting them there with vehicles, Ethan being loaded into the ambulance right now with a paramedic on each side. Maya, Rachel said, do you want to ride in the ambulance with Ethan right next to him the whole way? Maya unfolded her arms. Yes. Then you're going in the ambulance. She looked at the paramedic who gave her a nod. She looked at Wyatt. He gave her a nod. She looked at Maya. You hold his hand and you tell him you're there, okay? Don't let go. Maya walked toward the ambulance with the bearing of someone who has been given a job that matters and fully intends to do it. She climbed in. She found Ethan's hand. She held it. The ambulance doors closed. The remaining 15 miles happened faster than Rachel expected. The convoy reformed around the 4 remaining children. Devin and Destiny and Marcus and Lily redistributed and resettled with a quiet efficiency that had stopped surprising Rachel and started simply impressing her, and they rode into Alamo behind the ambulance's flashing lights. The whole formation moving at a measured, deliberate pace that said this convoy was not in a hurry to impress anyone, only to deliver what it was carrying safely. Sandra Ochoa was in the hospital parking lot when they pulled in. Rachel saw her from 30 out, a trim woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the expression of someone who had driven 90 miles in 50 minutes, which was the expression of someone who had driven 90 miles in 50 minutes and was still processing every turn. She was standing next to a county vehicle with 2 caseworkers Rachel recognized, and she was watching the convoy pull in with an expression that moved through several distinct phases in about 4 seconds. The bikes parked. The children were helped down. Devin got off under his own power and immediately walked to the nearest concrete barrier and sat on it and put his hands between his knees and stared at the ground processing. Marcus got off still holding Lily, who had fallen asleep somehow in the last 5 miles, her cheek against his shoulder, her fist wrapped in his shirt. Destiny stepped off with a contained dignity, straightened her clothes, and looked around like she was deciding whether this situation met her standards. Then she looked at Sergeant, the man she'd ridden with, and she said, thank you. Just those 2 words, but with everything behind them, that a 14-year-old girl who didn't thank people easily could fit into 2 words. Sergeant looked at her and said, anytime. He said it like he meant it for real, not like a figure of speech. Sandra reached at Rachel in the middle of all of this. She took both of Rachel's hands in hers and looked at her face the way you look at someone you were afraid you might not see again. And she said, you look terrible. I feel worse than I look, Rachel said. Ethan is inside. They've got him on fluids. The doctor says he's going to be fine. Sandra squeezed her hands. They're all going to be fine. Rachel felt her knees want to go. She locked them. Good, she said, good. Sandra looked past Rachel at the formation of men who were doing something Rachel hadn't noticed until that moment. They were getting ready to leave. No fanfare, no gathering of attention, no waiting for acknowledgement. Bikes were being started one by one in that rolling sequence. Men were pulling on helmets. The whole machinery of departure was happening with the same quiet efficiency as everything else they'd done. Wait, Rachel turned around. Wait. She walked toward Wyatt, who was the last to reach for his helmet. He paused. She stopped in front of him, and she realized she had no speech prepared. She'd been running so hard all day on adrenaline and fear and the absolute necessity of holding herself together for 6 children that she'd never gotten to the part where she thought about what she would say when it was over. So she said what was true. I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to thank you for something this size. He looked at her. You don't need to. I need to. I need to say it. You stopped. 2 cars drove past us and left us there, and you stopped. Her voice was doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. You stopped, and you stayed, and you carried those kids 30 miles, and you sat on the road with Ethan for 6 minutes talking multiplication tables. So he wouldn't go somewhere we couldn't bring him back from, and I need you to know that I see that. I see all of it. I was quiet for a moment. The engines of his departing men were a low rumble in the background, a sound that should have felt threatening and instead felt like something else entirely. He reminds me of my son, Wyatt said. Rachel went still. The way he raised his hand before he said it. Please, we can't walk anymore. My son used to raise his hand. He stopped. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to stop. He died 8 years ago. He was 9. The word landed in the air between them and stayed there. Rachel didn't say she was sorry. She thought it felt it, all of it, but she didn't reach for the insufficient word. She just stood there and let him have said it. After a moment, Wyatt reached up and put his helmet on. The visor came down and his face was gone behind the shield. "Take care of your kids," he said. His voice was slightly muffled now, but still clear. He threw a leg over the bike. He kicked the engine to life. He pulled forward and fell into formation at the head of his column, and the column moved, and Rachel stood in the hospital parking lot and watched 20 Hells Angels ride out of Alamo in formation, back toward the desert they'd come from, back toward whatever road came next for them. No cameras, no reporters, no record of it except in the bodies of 6 living children who were right now inside a hospital being looked after. Sandra came to stand beside Rachel. They watched the last bike disappear. "The one in front," Sandra said. "Who is he?" Rachel thought about a man sitting cross-legged on a highway asking an 8-year-old multiplication tables. She thought about a son who raised his hand. She thought about 30 years of the world seeing one thing and something else entirely being underneath it. "Someone who stopped," she said. Sandra was still standing beside Rachel when the last echo of the engines faded and the parking lot went quiet. The quiet felt enormous. After 4 hours of heat and fear and noise and movement, the absence of all of it pressed against Rachel's eardrums like something physical. She became aware in that silence that her legs were shaking. Not dramatically, not the kind of shaking anyone could see, but a deep interior trembling that had probably been happening for the past hour, and that she'd been too busy to notice. She became aware that her lips were cracked, and that her shoulders had been locked up around her ears for so long that lowering them now sent a wave of pain across her upper back. She became aware that she was standing in a hospital parking lot in Nevada at 4:17 in the afternoon, and that 6 children were inside that hospital alive, which had not been a guaranteed outcome 8 hours ago when she'd loaded them into a van in Las Vegas, and that the gap between those two facts was so large she couldn't look directly at it yet. "Rachel," Sandra's voice was careful. The voice she used for clients in crisis, except pointed at Rachel, which was disorienting. "When did you last have water, real water?" "Red gave me on the bike I had," she tried to remember. "I had some. When maybe an hour ago." Sandra put a hand on her arm and steered her toward the hospital entrance with the gentle but non-negotiable firmness of a woman who had spent 30 years managing people who refused to take care of themselves. "You're going in. You're getting checked. Don't argue with me. I need to see the kids first." "You'll see them. From a bed if necessary." Sandra pushed the door open. "The caseworkers have them. Everyone is accounted for. Ethan is in pediatric ER. They've got the IV and doctor says his vitals are stabilizing. Lily is being evaluated now. The others are in the waiting area with Jamie and Corinne." Rachel stopped walking. "Maya." "In with Ethan. They had to practically pry her hand off his to get the IV in, and the nurse said she could stay." Sandra looked at her. "She didn't let go the whole way in the ambulance. Paramedic told me she talked to him the entire 15 miles. Just talked and talked about school and her favorite color and a dog she saw once. Kept him conscious." Rachel pressed her hand over her eyes. She held it there for 3 seconds. Then she put it down and kept walking. The waiting area was at the end of the first corridor, and Rachel heard them before she saw them. Not crying, not panic, just voices. The ordinary voices of children existing in a space, and the specific quality of that ordinariness hit her harder than fear would have. Devin's voice low and a little impatient. Marcus asking something, a nurse answering. Lily, she heard Lily saying something that made the nurse laugh. Lily was making a nurse laugh. That was the world they were in now on the other side of the highway. Lily was inside and cool and coherent enough to be funny. Rachel walked in, and Devin looked up from the chair he'd taken in the corner. The corner, always the position with the most visibility and the most wall at his back, and he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since mile 28, with that stripped-down expression he hadn't fully managed to put the armor back over yet. He looked at her, and then he looked away, which was Devin's version of, "I'm glad you're here." "You look bad," he said. "You're the second person to say that to me in 10 minutes. We've been here 15 minutes, and they gave us cups of water with those little ice chips in them," Marcus said. He was sitting with Lily in his lap, both arms around her, and Lily was very definitely not sleeping anymore. She was examining the cup of ice chips with the focus of a scientist who has discovered a new element. Lily wants more, but they said, "Wait. Those are for your stomach," Rachel said. She pulled a chair close and sat down close enough to touch all of them if she needed. "So it doesn't get upset. You'll get more in a little while." Lily looked up at her. Her color was better. Her eyes were tracking the way they should. Miss Rachel, she said very seriously, I rode a motorcycle. You did. Red has really red hair. He does. I touched it, and he said that was okay. She looked at her cup of ice chips, satisfied with this memory. It was soft. Rachel looked at Marcus over Lily's head. He was watching her with those steady 11-year-old eyes, and she thought this child held his little sister together for 4 hours in a broken van in the desert, and then climbed onto the back of a motorcycle with a stranger and held her through 30 miles of highway, and he did all of it without once, not once, falling apart where she could see it. She thought about what it cost to do that at 11 years old, what it quietly cost. You did good today, Marcus, she said. I mean that. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked at Lily and he said, she weighs more than she looks. Rachel understood that this was the closest Marcus was going to get to accepting the compliment right now, and she accepted it. Destiny was sitting 2 chairs down with her arms folded and her legs crossed and her phone in her hand. Someone had given her a charger, or she'd found an outlet because the phone was lit. She was doing the thing she did when she was processing something emotional, which was to pretend to be doing something else entirely while her brain worked through it in the background. Rachel had learned this about Destiny over 6 months of working with her. She left her to it. It was Devin who broke the quiet. He said without looking up from his shoes, is someone going to get in trouble? Rachel looked at him. For what? For today. For the van breaking down. For all of it. He paused. For you saying yes to the bikers. She held his gaze when he finally looked up. I don't know yet, she said, because she wouldn't lie to him. Probably there will be questions, reports, reviews. That's how it works. Could you lose your job? The question was flat, practical. The way Devin asked everything that mattered, stripped of sentiment, because sentiment was a luxury he'd learned not to bank on. I don't know, she said again. He looked at her for a long moment. You made the right call. I know. I just wanted to say that, in case it helps. He looked back at his shoes. It was the right call. Rachel had to press her fingernails into her palm again. The old trick. It was getting less effective. Thank you, Devin. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and a doctor came through. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the particular tiredness of someone who sees the worst days of other people's lives on a daily basis and has developed a precise, compassionate efficiency around it. She looked at Rachel. You're the caseworker, Rachel Carter. I am. Dr. Amara Singh, I've been with your Ethan. She sat in the chair across from Rachel and folded her hands in a way that said she was about to say something real. He's stable. His core temperature was elevated when he came in, but it's coming down the IV. Fluids are doing the work they need to do. His heart rhythm has normalized. He is going to be fine. Rachel said, okay, just that. It was close, Dr. Singh said. I want you to understand that. Another 30 minutes in that heat at the state he was in, when the paramedics got to him, it would have been a different conversation, she paused. The cold pack on the back of his neck, whoever did that bought him significant time. One of the bikers, Rachel said. Danny, he seemed to know what he was doing. Dr. Singh nodded. He knew exactly what he was doing. The cold pack, the positioning, keeping him talking, those were the right calls, in the right order, done quickly. She tilted her head slightly. Do you know if Danny has a medical background? I don't know anything about him, Rachel said. I don't even know his last name. Dr. Singh absorbed this. Well, tell him if you see him again that he saved that boy's life. Rachel nodded. She was not going to be able to hold herself together much longer. She could feel it in the way her breath was trying to go uneven. Can I see him, Ethan? Let us get the second bag of fluids going and then yes, 15 minutes. Dr. Singh stood. She looked around at the other children, the unconscious assessment of a doctor who cannot turn it off. The others. Lily is being evaluated. The others need checking, but they seem better. Being inside helped. Get them all seen before you leave tonight. She looked at Rachel. That includes you. She left. The door swung shut behind her. The room was quiet again. Devin was still looking at his shoes. Marcus was still holding Lily, who had fallen asleep again, with a half-eaten ice chip in her hand. Destiny had stopped pretending to look at her phone and was looking at the closed door with an expression Rachel hadn't seen on her before open. Almost young, the way 14 looks when it stops performing. Miss Rachel, Destiny said. Yeah, that man, the big one, the one who was in front. She paused, choosing words. Did you know he lost his kid? Rachel looked at her. You heard that? I was close. Destiny met her eyes. In the parking lot. You and him. She was quiet for a moment. He rode out here 30 miles with Ethan. Because Ethan reminded him of his son. Yes. Destiny looked down at her phone, not at the screen, just down. She stopped. Started again. I didn't think people did things like that. Not for kids like us. The way she said it, kids like us landed in the room like something dropped. Not self-pitying, just true. A factual inventory of what Destiny understood about the world and where children in the foster system fit inside it, assembled from 14 years of first-hand evidence. Rachel leaned forward. People do things like that, she said. Today proved it. Destiny looked. Something was moving behind her eyes, not tears. Destiny didn't cry easily. Something harder than tears. Something like recalibration, like a 14-year-old girl quietly revising a fundamental assumption about what strangers were capable of. Yeah, she said finally. I guess today proved it. The next 20 minutes moved in layers. A nurse came and took Devin and Destiny and Marcus for individual evaluations. Mild to moderate dehydration for all three, manageable nothing that fluids and observation couldn't address. Lily's eval came back with the same conclusion, plus a note about monitoring for heat rash and keeping her hydrated for the next 48 hours. All four released into the waiting area with juice boxes and saltine crackers, and the specific cheerfulness of pediatric nurses who understand that the emotional landing is as important as the medical one. Devin ate 6 crackers without comment. Marcus shared his juice with Lily without being asked. Destiny read the label on her juice box like it contained information she needed for an exam. And then Sandra came through the corridor door with a look on her face that Rachel recognized as the prelude to a conversation she had not been looking forward to. Rachel, Sandra sat down beside her and lowered her voice. State oversight called. Rachel felt her stomach drop. Already, news travels. Someone at the hospital made a call routine notification foster kids involved in a medical incident protocol. It went up the chain faster than I expected. Sandra's voice was steady, but her hands were doing the thing they did when she was managing her own anxiety, moving slightly against each other in her lap. Regional director is aware. They want a full incident report by 9 a.m. tomorrow. They want to speak with you directly. About the van. About everything. The van, the road, the decision to walk the PM. Sandra paused. The motorcycles. Rachel waited. Rachel. Sandra looked at her carefully. I need to know exactly what happened, all of it, because I am going to back you completely, but I need to know what I'm backing. So Rachel told her, all of it in order, from the moment the belt gave out to the moment she watched the last bike disappear from the parking lot. She didn't edit, she didn't soften, she put every decision on the table in the order she'd made it, and she explained the logic behind each one and where the logic had failed and what she'd done when it failed. The 2 cars that drove past, the decision to walk, the 1.25 miles, Ethan going down, the sound of the engines coming around the curve. Sandra listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Sandra. When Rachel finished, Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you put foster children on Hell's Angels motorcycles. I did. Without prior authorization, without contacting the state, I had no signal. I had 2 kids heading toward heat stroke. I had 0 alternatives that didn't end with a body bag. Rachel kept her voice level. If I had it to do again, I would do it again. Every time. Sandra looked at her. A long look, the kind that takes inventory of everything it sees. I know you would, she said. That's what I'm going to tell them. Rachel blinked. You're going to. You made a judgment call under extreme circumstances with no resources and no support, and every child in your care is alive because of it. That's the story. That's the only story. Sandra's voice had shifted into something harder, more certain. I will not allow the paperwork to erase what actually happened today. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Sandra, don't thank me. Write me a very thorough incident report. Sandra stood up. And drink something. You look terrible. Rachel almost laughed. The almost laugh became something else in her chest, something that was right at the border of tears and laughter and exhaustion, and the particular relief of being told by someone with authority that you are not alone in what you did. She held it together. She was getting very good at holding it together today. She thought she might fall apart completely sometime around next Tuesday in private, and that would be okay. She was still sitting with that thought when the door at the end of the corridor opened again. A nurse looked in. "Mr. Carter, he's asking for you." Rachel stood up. She looked at the others, Devin, who gave her that small nod again. Marcus, who was busy explaining something to Lily, using saltine crackers as props. Destiny, who met her eyes and then looked away in a way that was nothing like dismissal. She followed the nurse down the corridor. The room was small and cool and smelled like antiseptic and something else underneath it, something human. Ethan was in the bed with the IV in his arm and the color coming back to his face. Real color. The color of a living 8-year-old boy who had been to the edge of something and come back from it. He looked smaller in the bed than he had on the highway. He looked like what he was, which was a child. Maya was sitting in the chair beside him. She still had his hand. When she saw Rachel, Maya looked up, and Rachel saw the effort it had taken, what it had cost Maya to be the steady one, the talking one, the hand-holding one for 15 miles in an ambulance. The effort was visible now that it didn't have to be hidden anymore. Maya was 10 years old, and she had held a boy conscious through force of will and conversation and the refusal to let go, and it had taken everything she had, and Rachel could see all of it in her face. "I wanted to sleep," Maya said. "I kept him awake." "I know you did," Rachel said. "You did perfect." Maya nodded. She looked back at Ethan. He said 56 again on the way in. In the ambulance, the paramedic asked him questions, and Ethan said his favorite number was 56, and the paramedic didn't know why. "What did you tell him?" "I said it was a long story." Ethan opened his eyes. They were clear. The right kind of clear, present, and tracking, not the flat distance of before. He looked at Rachel and he said, "Hi." "Hi yourself," she said. She sat on the edge of the bed. She put her hand over his free one, the one Maya wasn't holding, and she felt the warmth in it, and it was the right warmth this time, living warmth, not the burning wrongness of before. "How do you feel?" "Cold," he said. "They have the air really high in here. I'll ask them to bring you a blanket." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to the IV in his arm, then back to Rachel. "The man," he said. "Wyatt. What about him?" "He sat with me on the road when I felt bad." Ethan's brow creased slightly with the effort of understanding something. "He talked to me so I wouldn't go to sleep." "He did." "Is he gone?" "He had to go," Rachel said. "They had somewhere to be." Ethan thought about this. "Did you say thank you?" "I did." He seemed to accept this. He looked at the ceiling. "He smelled like motor oil," he said with the scientific neutrality of a child cataloging sensory data. "And something else, like wood, like outside. Leather, maybe?" "Maybe." He was quiet again. "Then, Miss Rachel, why didn't the cars stop before, the two cars?" Rachel looked at him. The question was not angry. It was genuinely curious, the way children are curious about the things adults can't explain, with no filter between the not knowing and the asking. "I don't know," she said, because that was the truth. She'd been in this work long enough to have her theories: fear, inconvenience, the way people talk themselves out of stopping through a complex calculus of risk and self-interest, and the human tendency to assume that someone else will handle it. But she didn't know. Not really. "The bikers stopped," Ethan said. "They did. And the cars didn't." "No." I thought about this for a long time with the focused seriousness that he brought to math problems. "That's weird," he finally said. "Yeah," Rachel agreed. "It's weird." Maya, who had been listening to all of this, with her hand still wrapped around Ethan's, said quietly, "I think the cars were scared." Rachel looked at her. "Of what?" "Of getting involved." Maya said it plainly, without judgment, just laying the idea out. "People get scared of getting involved because then it's their problem too." She paused. The bikers didn't care if it was their problem. Rachel sat with that for a moment. A 10-year-old had just summarized something that sociologists had written entire papers about in one sentence while sitting in a hospital chair holding a sick kid's hand. "No," Rachel said. "They didn't care if it was their problem. That's what makes them different," Maya said with the finality of someone closing a chapter. The door opened. Sandra leaned in. Her expression had changed, something new in it, something Rachel couldn't immediately read. "Rachel, there is someone at the front desk asking for you." "Who?" Sandra's expression did the thing again. "He says his name is Danny." Rachel stood up so fast the chair scraped back. She looked at Sandra. "The biker Danny, he came back." "Not just him." Sandra held the door open wider. There are 7 of them in the lobby. Rachel walked out of the room and down the corridor and through the doors to the lobby and stopped. 7 of the bikers were there. Not Wyatt. She scanned immediately and didn't find him. But Danny was there, and Red and Sergeant and Cole and Tommy with his silver braid, and 2 others whose names she hadn't caught. They were standing in the hospital lobby in their leather and their patches, looking precisely as out of place as they should have looked, and somehow not out of place at all, because the thing they were carrying that made them out of place was already gone, replaced by something else. Danny stepped forward. He was holding a paper bag, the kind pharmacies put prescriptions in. He held it out to Rachel. Electrolyte supplements, he said, the kind for kids, and a thing of sunscreen SPF 100, the good kind, waterproof, for the drive back. He paused. And my number, in case there are questions about what I did medically, in case the hospital needs to know what was administered on the road. Rachel took the bag. She looked at it. She looked at him. You came back, she said. We were halfway to Tonopah when Tommy said we should have left contact information, in case of liability. Danny said it practically like a man covering a practical concern, but his eyes were doing something his voice wasn't. And Red wanted to know if the kids were okay. Red behind him raised a hand in a half wave that was aggressively casual. Totally fine if they're asleep or whatever, just if you could let us know. Generally. Rachel looked at these 7 men. She thought about what it had taken to turn a convoy around. She thought about the conversation that had probably happened between Tonopah in this parking lot, which she would never be privy to, the way one of them had said something, and the others had responded, and the decision had formed without ceremony. She thought about the fact that they were standing in a hospital lobby in their cuts in a town that had its own complicated history with men who looked like them, and they were standing there anyway. Ethan is stable, she said. His vitals normalized. The doctor says he's going to be fine. She watched the information move through them, one face to the next. Lily is fine. Devin, Marcus, Destiny, Maya, all fine. All going to be okay. Something happened in the group, an exhale collective, the kind that only happens when a breath has been held for a long time without anyone fully acknowledging they were holding it. Red looked at the floor, or he pressed his lips together. He nodded once. Danny said, good. Just that. But the word had the weight of everything that had happened in the last 4 hours inside it. Rachel reached into the paper bag and found the folded slip with Danny's number on it. She looked at it. His name was written at the top. Daniel Reyes. Below the number in small letters, 2 words, former EMT. She looked up. Former EMT, she said. He met her eyes. 14 years before he stopped. Before a lot of things. She understood that the things he wasn't saying were complicated, and she understood that they weren't her business, and she understood that they didn't matter compared to what those 14 years of training had done for an 8-year-old boy on a Nevada highway this afternoon. Dr. Singh, Rachel said, the doctor who treated Ethan. She wants me to tell whoever put the cold pack on him that they saved his life. Danny was quiet. Something moved across his face quickly before he contained it. Tell her it was nothing, he said. It wasn't nothing. It was what anybody would have done. Danny, she held his gaze. It was not what anybody did. It was what you did. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. He nodded at the floor the way men nod when they've received something they don't know how to hold. Behind him, Red said very quietly, can we see him? Rachel blinked. What? Ethan, the kid. Red's voice was careful, like he knew this was an unusual thing to ask, and was asking it anyway. Not for long, just if he's awake, if that's okay, if that's not weird. Rachel looked at Sandra, who was standing at the edge of this, and Sandra gave her a look that said, this is your call, and I will back whatever you decide. She thought about a man sitting cross-legged on an asphalt road, talking multiplication tables to a fading child. She thought about a small hand wrapped around a large forearm. She thought about 56. He's awake, Rachel said. Come on. She led 7 Hells Angels down a hospital corridor in Alamo, Nevada at 5:43 in the afternoon, and she did not look back to see whether the nurses were staring, which they were, and she did not slow down to manage anyone's reaction to the sight of it, which she would have done yesterday. Yesterday felt like a different country. She pushed the door open. Maya looked up from her chair. Ethan looked up from the pillow. His eyes went to the men in the doorway, and he looked at them for a moment, at Red and Danny, and Sergeant and Cole and Tommy, and the others filling the frame of the door. And then his face did something it hadn't done since the van died on Highway 375 that morning. He smiled, a real one. The complete, uncomplicated smile of an 8-year-old boy who recognizes people he's glad to see. You came back, he said. Red stepped forward. He stopped at the side of the bed. He was a large man in a small room, and he managed both of those things with a care that made the room feel exactly the right size. How's the math? Red said. Ethan thought about it. 8 times 9 is 72, he said. Yeah, it is. Red's voice did something at the end of that sentence. He pressed his mouth together for a moment. Yeah, it absolutely is. They stayed for 22 minutes. Rachel knew because she watched the clock on the wall without meaning to, counting the minutes the way she'd been counting things all day, steps on asphalt, miles on a highway, seconds until an ambulance. 22 minutes of 7 large men in a small hospital room, arranged around one small bed, with a carefulness that had nothing to do with their size and everything to do with what was in that room. Red did most of the talking. He had a gift for it, an easy, unhurried quality that made conversation feel like something that was just happening rather than something being managed. He asked Ethan about school. He asked about Mr. Patel. He asked whether 56 was genuinely Ethan's favorite number or whether he just picked it because Wyatt asked, and Ethan said with complete seriousness that 56 had been his favorite number since first grade because it was 8 times 7 and 8. And 7 were both good numbers, and putting them together made something better, which Red absorbed with the gravity it deserved. Danny stood at the foot of the bed and said almost nothing, but his eyes moved over Ethan with the steady attention of someone who spent 22 minutes doing a continuous quiet assessment and was satisfied incrementally with everything he saw. Once he adjusted the angle of the IV line where it had kinked slightly against the bed rail, doing it without drawing attention, without asking permission, with the automatic competence of a man whose hands remembered what to do even when the rest of him had moved on to other things. Maya watched all of it from her chair with her hands folded in her lap, having finally relinquished Ethan's hand when it became clear he was not going anywhere. She watched the men, the way she watched everything with that complete cataloging attention, and at some point she looked at Rachel, who was standing near the door, and gave her a look that Rachel had no precise words for. It was the look of a child revising a foundational document, quietly, permanently. Sargent was the one who said it was time. He didn't say it out loud. He caught Red's eye from across the room and did something with his chin, and Red looked at the clock and then at Ethan and said, "We've got to roll, buddy. Long ride back." Ethan nodded. He'd known it was coming. He was a child who had a lot of practice with things ending, with people leaving, with the moment where someone said the equivalent of "we've got to roll." He had learned not to grab at those moments. He had learned to let them come and receive them and not fight them. Rachel knew this about him, and it broke her heart every time she saw it, and it broke her heart now. But then Ethan said, "Will I see you again?" And the question was in the room before he could decide not to ask it, which meant he'd decided to ask it, which meant something had shifted in him today that his usual defenses hadn't caught up with yet. Red looked at him for a moment. He didn't give him easy comfort. He didn't say of course or sure thing or the reflexive reassurances that adults give children to smooth over the moment. He thought about it visibly, and then he said, "I don't know, honestly. We ride a lot of different roads." He paused. "But I'll tell you this, I'm going to think about you every time somebody asks me a multiplication question. So in that way, yeah, you'll be around." Ethan considered this with the seriousness it was given. 8 times 9, he said. 72, Red said immediately. "You're good at math. I had a good teacher just now." Red reached out and put his fist gently against Ethan's shoulder. Not a bump, just a resting of contact. A gesture that said something that didn't have a word. Then he straightened up and stepped back. Danny leaned down and said, very quietly, just to Ethan, something that Rachel was too far away to hear. Ethan listened. He nodded once with his whole body, the way children nod when they've received something important and want to make sure it registers. Danny straightened up. His jaw was set in a way that was working at something. They filed out, one by one, back through the door, back into the corridor, the sound of their boots on the linoleum receding down the hall. Rachel followed them to the lobby where the other 3, Sergeant Cole Tommy, had waited near the entrance, patient and quiet. In the lobby, Rachel stopped in front of Danny. "What did you say to him?" she asked. At the end, Danny met her eyes. He was quiet for a moment, deciding something. Then he said, "I told him that the next time someone drives past him without stopping, he should remember that the next person coming might be the one who stops, and that the next person is always coming." He paused. I needed someone to tell me that once, a long time ago. His voice was controlled and flat, and underneath the control, there was something that had no name. Figured he might need it too. Rachel looked at him and thought about 14 years as an EMT, and before a lot of things, and a man who had ended up on a motorcycle in the Nevada desert and stopped for 6 children in a broken van. She thought about what roads a person takes to arrive at a particular moment. She thought about how none of those roads looked like what you expected from the outside. Thank you, she said, for everything, for coming back, for the cold pack, for all of it. Danny nodded. He put his hand out and she shook it, a real handshake, firm and brief, the kind that doesn't need anything added to it. Then they were gone. The lobby doors swung shut behind them and Rachel stood in the air-conditioned quiet and listened to the engines start up in the parking lot, 7 of them this time, and then the sound of them moving, pulling together, heading out of Alamo and back onto whatever road came next. She stood there until the sound was completely gone. Then she went back to her kids. The next 3 days happened in the methodical, exhausting way that all institutional aftermath happens, forms and phone calls in the particular bureaucratic machinery of the Nevada child welfare system, grinding through the events of a single afternoon on Highway 375. Sandra had been right about the state's interest. Rachel sat in 2 separate interviews with regional oversight, walked 2 different investigators, through every decision point, answered every question with the same directness she'd brought to Sandra in the hospital parking lot. She put it all on the table: the belt, the map, the walk, the bikers. The second investigator, a woman named Hollis, who had the measured neutrality of someone trained to have no readable opinion, during an interview stopped her at the bikers and said, "You authorized transport of 6 minor children in state care on personal motorcycles operated by members of a motorcycle club." "I authorized the survival of 6 children in my care who were going to die on a Nevada highway if I didn't," Rachel said. "Yes." Hollis looked at her over the top of her glasses. "That's not the language the report uses." I know what language the report uses," Rachel said. "I wrote it, but that's what happened, and I'll say it that way every time someone asks." Hollis wrote something down. She wrote it for a long time, which could mean anything, and Rachel sat with the not knowing and was surprised to find that she was okay with it. Whatever happened to her job, whatever the review board decided, whatever the official language of the official report concluded about her professional judgment, she had looked at 2 children going into heat stroke on a highway shoulder, and she had said yes to 20 strangers who stopped, and every version of herself she respected was okay with that decision. The review board's conclusion came 8 days later. No formal disciplinary action, a notation in her file about the incident, a mandatory review of van maintenance protocols for the district, which was frankly overdue and should have happened before a serpentine belt ate itself on a desert highway with 6 children aboard. Sandra delivered the news in her office with the same contained satisfaction of someone who had argued for an outcome and gotten it. They cited extraordinary circumstances and sound judgment under extreme conditions, she said, which is not language the board uses very often in my experience. "Devin said it was the right call," Rachel said. Sandra looked at her. "Devin is 13. "Devin is also right," Rachel said, "about most things when you let him be." Sandra smiled. It was a small smile, the kind she rationed carefully, which made it worth something. "Go check on your kids," she said. The kids were in 3 different placements across 2 counties, as they had been before that Tuesday, as the system required them to be. The world did not pause its logistics for what had happened on Highway 375. But Rachel checked on each of them in the days that followed, doing the visits she would have done anyway, the calls she would have made anyway, the ordinary work of a social worker who had 6 specific children on her caseload and no intention of letting the extraordinary nature of one afternoon change the ordinary commitment of every day before and after it. Devin was in a new placement, a quiet couple in their 50s who had 3 decades of fostering behind them in the particular quality that came from it, which was a kind of unshakable steadiness, the ability to be present without requiring anything from it. Devin's caseworker told Rachel he'd been, in her words, surprisingly communicative in the first week, which for Devin was the equivalent of a breakthrough. Rachel was not surprised. She thought about a 13-year-old sitting on asphalt next to an 8-year-old to make sure the smaller boy knew he wasn't alone, and she thought that some things open doors inside people that don't close again. She called him on a Thursday the second week. He picked up after 2 rings, which was also unlike him. How's the placement? She asked. Fine, he said. Then after a pause, she makes good food. High praise. I didn't say it was high praise. I said it was good food. Rachel smiled. Fair enough. How are you sleeping? A pause, the kind of pause Devin used when he was deciding how honest to be. Better, he said. Mostly. Good. She let that sit. Then I heard from the review board, and I still have my job. A silence, and then in the flattest possible tone that still managed to carry something underneath it. Good. You should. Thank you, Devin. I'm not doing anything. Another pause. Ethan doing okay? Ethan is doing great, Rachel said. He told his whole class about the motorcycles. Apparently, he's been describing Wyatt as a very large man who is good at math. A sound came through the phone that it took Rachel a moment to identify because she'd never heard it from Devin before. It was a laugh, a real one, short and involuntary, and immediately self-conscious, the kind that escapes before you can decide to let it out. He said, that's accurate. It really is, Rachel said. The twist came on a Friday 3 weeks after the highway. Rachel was in her car in the parking lot of her office building, eating a sandwich before an afternoon of home visits when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Nevada area code. She answered it. Ms. Carter, a man's voice, familiar in a way she couldn't place immediately, and then she placed it flat, direct, the specific cadence of someone who said what they meant without wrapping it in anything extra. Wyatt, she said. Yeah. A pause. Hope this is okay. Danny had your number from the contact sheet. It's okay. She put the sandwich down. How are you, Strong? Fine, good. He sounded slightly uncomfortable, which from him was the equivalent of most people sounding deeply uncomfortable. I called because there's something I didn't tell you in the parking lot. I started to, and then I didn't, and I've been thinking about it, and I think you should know. Rachel waited. My son, Wyatt said. The one I told you about. He was in foster care before he came to me. A pause. The system had him for 3 years. He was 4 when he went in and 7 when I got custody. His mother was my sister. Another pause longer. She died. And it took me 3 years to get through the legal process to bring him home. 3 years of him in placements moving around. 3 years of him with caseworkers who were, some of them were good, some of them weren't. His voice was controlled and flat, and the flatness was doing a lot of work. One of them was very good, a woman. She used to call him on Thursdays. She knew he slept better when someone checked in on Thursdays. I don't know how she knew that. She just paid attention. Rachel was very still in her car. He talked about her, Wyatt said. Even after he came home, he talked about her. Said she was the one who made him feel like someone was keeping track. Like he wasn't just moving through the system. Like he mattered to a specific person. His voice did something at the end of that sentence. He died at 9. Car accident. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was fast. He stopped. But those 2 years I had him. He was okay. He was a good kid. He did math. He raised his hand. Another stop. When your boy stepped forward on the road, when he said what he said, I wasn't thinking about the club or the road or anything else. I just saw a kid who needed someone to stop. And I stopped. Rachel had both hands pressed flat against her thighs. She was not going to cry in a parking lot in the middle of a workday. She was not. Wyatt, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me, he said quickly. I'm telling you because I think you should know that what you do the Thursday calls the paying attention, the keeping track. I saw it in your kids. In the way they looked at you, in the way they trusted you when they had every reason not to trust anyone. That doesn't happen by accident. He paused. You're the caseworker my nephew had, the good kind. I wanted you to know I know the difference. The silence that followed was one of the most complete silences Rachel had ever sat inside. It had weight and dimension, and every bit of it was earned. His name, she said finally. Her voice was not entirely even. Your nephew, what was his name? Lucas, Wyatt said. He went by Luke. Rachel nodded, though he couldn't see it. She nodded the way you nod when a piece of information has settled somewhere permanent inside you, when you know you'll carry a name without ever having met the person it belonged to. Thank you for telling me, she said. Yeah, a pause. Take care of your kids, Ms. Carter. I will, she said. I do. The line went quiet. Rachel sat in her car in the parking lot with the phone in her lap and the uneaten sandwich beside her, and the afternoon sun coming through the windshield, and she let herself have the moment. All of it. The whole accumulated weight of Highway 375 and everything it had taught her about the two cars that didn't stop, and the 20 that did, about the world's readiness to judge by surface and its blindness to what lay underneath, about the specific courage it takes for a child to step forward and say, please, we can't walk anymore, and the specific courage it takes for a grown man to hear it and not drive on. She thought about Luke, who was 9 years old and liked math, and raised his hand. She thought about Ethan, who was 8 years old and liked math, and raised his hand. She thought about the fact that Wyatt Dalton had ridden 32 miles through a Nevada desert with a stranger's child in his arms, because somewhere in the overlap between those two boys, he had found something he refused to leave on the road. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to Devin's name, then to Maya's, then to Ethan's placement contact, and Lily's and Marcus's and Destiny's. 6 names on a screen. 6 children alive and moving through the world on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after a van died on Highway 375. She put the phone in her pocket. She picked up her sandwich. She had 3 home visits starting in 40 minutes and a Thursday call to make before then, in a full caseload that had not paused for any of this, because the work did not pause, the work never paused, and she would not have it any other way. Because here was the thing she knew now. The thing Highway 375 had burned into her with the certainty of a desert sun. It was never about whether help was coming. It was about who was willing to stop when they found it in their path. The 2 cars had a choice, and they made it. Wyatt Dalton had a choice, and he made it. Danny Reyes turned a convoy around in Tonopah and came back to a hospital to give a child his phone number and say what anybody would do, as if any of it had been ordinary. None of it was ordinary. Every bit of it was chosen. Rachel Carter started her car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove towards her next family, toward the next child who needed someone paying attention on a Thursday. The next kid who needed to know that someone specific was keeping track, the next small person moving through a system that was imperfect and underfunded and exhausting and staffed, when it was staffed right by people who showed up anyway. She had work to do. She had always had work to do, and now she had something else too, the knowledge certain and permanent, that on the worst day of her professional life, when 2 cars looked at her and drove on, 20 strangers turned their engines off and asked what they could do. That was not a small thing. That was not a thing she would ever mistake for small again. Some people stop. That was the truth Highway 375 had handed her, brutal and simple and absolute. Some people stop, and when they do, it changes everything.